Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to my lecture. So today we are going to talk about role of government. So role of government in the production of goods and services are very important, and we also have seen even if market is in equilibrium, especially in a point where demand for the goods and supply of the goods are intersecting to each other, even at that point maybe market is at equilibrium because private market efficiency is there at the equilibrium point, but from society's point of view it is not very efficient. Although private market equilibrium point, consumer might be getting very high level of consumer surplus, and producers also is getting highest level of producer surplus, but then from society's point of view that point might not be socially optimum efficient point. And there in this context, in our previous couple of lectures, we already discussed that government's role is very important, especially to produce or to get economy as a socially optimum level of points. Maybe from the output point of view, in the private market, it could be either overproductions or underconsumptions or underproductions, but still with the help of government interventions, society as a whole can get the optimum level of output. So that is the point of discussion that we are going to discuss much more in details. So we will be focusing more on the government's role in the productions of goods and services. So we will first discuss about what are we actually meaning by saying when we say that public productions of goods and services. So there are a couple of goods that we already know from the classifications that we discussed in our previous lectures, like when we should call certain goods are public goods, when we call certain goods are say private goods, and when we call some goods are private goods but then publicly provided. So and some goods are not very pure public goods, some goods are not pure private goods. So in that context, we can actually discuss like what do we mean by public productions. So here we will be talking more in details. So first, let us again kind of reiterate that what we are saying, that markets are efficient when they are competitive. So when they are competitive, when goods are homogeneous and large number of buyers and sellers, they can actually enter in the market. And then usual equilibrium point where there is no oversupply or shortage of the productions, especially the point at which demand and supply they are intersecting at each other, and then price gets determined by the market. So nobody has the market power, so market is deciding on the price, and that's how we say that these are the very perfect competitive market, because consumer as well as producers, they also have the perfect knowledge about the product, and then products are homogeneous. In that kind of case, markets are we consider as efficient. And here of course government role is very minimum, and therefore we call it role of public production is very less or minimal. So without government interventions, one firm or a few firms, if they are exercising market power or controlling price, that is the point at which consumer gets exploited, and that is not the situation that we already learned is perfect competitive conditions. So these are the monopoly behavior of the producers and monopoly market that we create. So this is where government intervention is there. And we already know that under monopoly, where demand curve is the downward sloping, but in the perfect competitive market, we see that demand curve is not downward sloping, it is horizontal straight line, where price elasticity of demand is infinity, which is like perfectly elastic, and that's how we know that price is getting determined at that point where average revenue and price is equals to each other, and that is where we see that demand curve is horizontal straight line. But then in monopoly, on the other hand, demand curve is the downward sloping, which actually has law of diminishing returns characteristics, and where price and quantity are negatively related, because that is where monopolies or market power decides the price level, and this gets associated with the demand for goods. So is a typical case of demand function which is downward sloping, and we already know that monopoly has the power, and that's how monopoly price power that they have it, on which monopolists make the profit. So monopoly profit, and this is basically where the situation where government intervention is required. So now publicly produced private goods, what do we mean? Certain goods like say water, access to water, or gas, or say electricity. So these are private goods, or postal services. These are the private goods or services that are publicly produced. So that is a point that we are talking about. Like in this publicly produced private goods actually comes under public productions, right? So in this particular discussion that we also need to kind of categorize is like privatization. What do we mean by privatization? It's like market based economies. Like if entire productions of certain goods and services produced by certain say industries, if they are privately owned companies, they are actually producing, and that's how price getting determined in the private market. So that is the process that we call process of the privatizations, right? So it is basically we are keeping things on the market, and then market will decide how it should function and how it should give the market efficiency point, or how price should be determined, and how optimum level of outcome will be determined. In this particular context, the other point that we are supposed to know is the nationalizations. So what does that mean? Nationalization means the government takes over a large number of corporations, and in some cases the entire industry. So in context of natural monopoly, we already discussed in the market, sometimes it is best that instead of producing one commodity by a number of small farms, sometimes it is better that only one farm takes care, or the organization in our we had explained that say government is deciding to produce entire commodity. So that is the process that we are talking about, and it is referred as nationalizations. So where government takes over a large number of corporations, in some cases entire industries, right? So it like say oil and gas in some of the countries, or say banks services in India which got nationalized, is basically government is taking care of banking services. But slowly it is also in some cases we are also seeing that in case of India, the privatization also is there in the banking services. But then as we know that in 1969 that our banks got nationalized. So these are few points that we are supposed to keep in our mind while talking about public production of goods and services. So now let's move ahead and then let's proceed with the natural monopoly, where we'll talk about especially public production of the private goods. So let us take one example, and then let us understand what we mean by saying natural monopoly. So what is natural monopoly? The most important market failure that has led to public production of private goods arises when markets are not competitive. We already said that. So perfect competitive where there is no oversupply or there is no shortages, the point at which demand and supply they are intersecting with each other, and that point price is getting determined by the market, and also quantity that we get the optimum level of quantity. So at that level, that point is basically perfectly competitive. As we said that any I mean here is like market is efficient by the private consumer and also private producers. But then from social's point of view, it is not optimum, and therefore government decides like it is better, it will be much more cost effective, especially for the consumer, and that's where say through the taxation government can intervene, or through subsidy government can actually encourage certain companies or certain industries, for instance solar panel, the example that we had given, to create the positive consumption externalities among the consumers as well as the producers, and that is where market actually fails, because market doesn't get into optimum level of price and quantity, because it leads to over or under supply of the total quantity or output, and that is where we call it that government role is important. So in this particular case, this is a very a special case that we will be talking about, where government actually takes care of producing entire private commodities, like say cable, or say oil and gas, for instance, or any utility services at the household level. So now industries that we are talking about. So when we are talking about certain industries are producing certain commodities which are private goods, and which needs to be taken care of by the government, because market or government actually should protect consumer to face any sort of what we call exploitations from the market. So the industries that we are talking about, for which increasing returns are so significant, so that is very important. Certain industries which has increasing returns are very significant, very high, that only one firm should operate in any region are referred to the natural monopolies. So this is what we are really very important point to remember, is like increasing returns for those industries, and those industries are for those particular commodities. It is always better that single firm or government, for instance, can take care of. And the examples that we had given is like water, then electricity, postal services, cable TV, or natural gas. So these are the commodities that one can actually imagine where there is an increasing return. So what does increasing return means? Like when we put like say 1 or 2 units of labor, then of course output will be much more higher as compared to the ratio of the labor and capital, or ratio of the inputs. So this is generally very product where consumer demands very high, and that is where consumer also is quite prone to get exploited from the market power, and that is where single firm actually can resolve the issues. Even Indian Railways or IRCTC services in the Indian Railway can also be taken as one of the examples. So now there are 2 ways in which we can actually highlight this particular point more in details. One is with sunk cost and with no sunk cost. So with sunk cost, what is sunk cost first? So let us first understand what do we mean by sunk cost. So in the production for the farm, so initial some of the costs that are involved that cannot be recovered through the production function or from the recurring production function. So those costs which can be recovered from the production, those costs will be referred as a sunk cost. So in some cases there are some sunk cost, a higher sunk cost, and in some cases there is no much higher sunk cost. So now there is a difference that that one can also remember in this particular context, like people they get confused between 2 costs. One is sunk cost and the fixed cost. So fixed cost is very much part of the production function, just like average variable cost, but then for fixed cost that we know, for instance, annual maintenance of heavy machines or capital equipments, or say regular electricity or power consumptions of any factory or in the industry, that we already know. If land is on lease, then certain amount of rent that will be dedicated every month or every year, which is actually known, and this can be regarded as fixed cost, and that can be recovered from the total profit and also from the overall production function. But in certain costs that can't be recovered, which are mainly paid at the initial level, like for instance bribe, or for instance say registration cost for the land for setting up any industry or the factory. So now one can actually refer here, and one can actually say that bribe, for instance, to operate certain industry or certain establishment, so one really needs to pay bribe on a regular basis. If that is becoming regular basis, that will be can be considered as informal or illegal cost, but then that particular cost can be kind of added to the fixed cost, and it can be treated as fixed cost. But then remember, bargaining cost will be very high, and this particular cost, regular cost, which is not accounted, so this unaccounted cost will be borne finally by the consumer. So again, consumer will be exploited by the higher price. So one really needs to be very careful about what cost needs to be included in the production function as part of the cost of production, and what cost cannot be considered as part of the production function or as part of the fixed cost. So sunk cost, so let us take the only one example of the sunk cost, and then we can see with sunk cost what would be the natural monopoly, and without sunk cost what would be the monopoly, natural monopoly situations. So we can actually explain this with the help of diagram. So let us assume, let us take any commodity and say on the vertical axis is the price of that commodity, and then on the horizontal axis it is quantity demanded, and for simplicity I am just keeping it say marginal cost constant, which is we are drawing as like horizontal straight line, which is nothing, is basically what we actually say private producers supply curve, right, or farm supply curve. And then let's see, downward sloping is the average revenue, and we are imagining this market is basically the monopoly market, and monopoly market demand curve is downward sloping. Just imagine the function that we are talking about, like P equals to small a by B Q. So in this particular case, so if say equation 1 is the demand function, and here it is very clear that price and quantity are negatively related, and this is nothing, it is like downward sloping demand curve. And then as we know in the imperfect competitive markets, marginal revenue is half of the slope of the marginal revenue is half of the demand curve, which is average revenue, right. So now we can also see say this is average cost curve. Average cost curve is downward sloping again, which is U shape, and then once it reaches at the minimum, and then again it goes it goes up, which is increasing. So we already know this all features we already discussed in our cost functions discussions, right, in our one of the previous lectures. So here there are couple of points here. So one is very clear, where demand and supply, like say one equilibrium point here, like say equilibrium say E, naught. At E naught we get quantity, which is Q naught, where demand and supply, they are intersecting with each other. So this Q naught is under perfect competition, one can actually say that, where demand and supply, they are intersecting at each other. So private market is getting equilibrium at that point, which is market, from market's point of view, market is providing efficient point, right? So now another one point, that equilibrium point that we get it, which is the conditions under monopoly that we know, where average revenue and average cost, they are getting intersecting at each other, which is like say point say E1, and here we get quantity Q1. It can be considered as Q1, where average revenue is equals to average cost. So at point E, there is no sunk cost, like say average cost is meeting or is equals to average revenue. It's like whatever the cost, average cost to produce the commodity of say Q1 amount of quantity, of the quantity that will be produced in the market. So whatever the cost, average cost of producing OQ amount of quantity, that I am getting it from the average revenue. So it is no profit, no loss at this point, especially at E1 at this particular clause, and this is what the condition under national monopoly. So now this is with like zero profit point, and zero profit point is which point? Zero profit point is at point E1, which is like zero profit point. And what is the zero profit points conditions? And here zero profit points, like say at E1, condition is average revenue is equals to average cost, right? So now monopolist, where sunk cost is involved, and sunk cost, when sunk cost will be involved, and then sunk cost has to be included in the product, and therefore price will go up, and that's where monopolist will try to impose that particular burden, like sunk cost on the consumer, so that particular cost will be transferred. So at that point definitely we have the monopoly profit. So here another one equilibrium, like market conditions. So where market conditions, that we know that first order conditions for the market profit maximization problem for any market, where marginal revenue gets equals to marginal cost. So here at point E2. So at point E2 we get Q2, and E2 is a point where we can see at point E2 where marginal revenue is equals to marginal cost, and this is the first order condition for any of the markets, and every firm is a rational rational producer or rational firm, and then they will try to maximize their profit. And in order to maximize this profit, it's always the first order condition always will be marginal revenue and marginal cost, they will be equals to each other. So at Q2 that we get, which is a typical market conditions, where marginal revenue and marginal cost, they are getting intersecting to each other, and corresponding to point E1 we are getting price, like say P1, and then the cost that are involved, like here at point say small, or we can say is E dash, and then we get P2 at point where this particular quantity up to OP2 is like average cost, like is a cost involved, and any price above OP2 is a monopolist power on the price and is a profit. So here we can actually say is P dash. So monopoly profit is the shaded area that we are showing. So when cost involved, sunk cost is involved, and then monopolist profit will be, so monopolist profit will be the area P1, P2, P dash, E dash area. So with, and here monopolist profit is basically with sunk cost, and at point E1 without sunk cost. So without sunk cost is basically no profit, like zero profit point, and with sunk cost monopolist has the power. So in this particular public production of private goods, so this is basically production should happen at OQ1 amount. So when we are talking about publicly produced private goods, is basically we are saying that quantity has to be produced up to OQ1 point, where average revenue equals to average cost, where zero profit point is there. So that is what natural monopoly in context of public production of the private goods. So now let's move to the next, like especially multi-product natural monopoly. So here one product one product that we explain. So now let us see the situation where multi-product natural monopolies happens, and here we are going to talk about pricing strategies. And we will not spend much time here because we already know what is the pricing strategy. In the pricing strategy, we already know that price elasticity of demand plays very important role, and we already discussed price elasticity. With regard to price elasticity, there are different types of price elasticities, and mainly two cases that we discussed in case of price elasticity of demand or price elasticity of supply is of course the elastic for elastic goods or inelastic goods, and that's how we know that demand curve or supply curve, they will be flatter when goods are elastic, and demand curve or supply curve will be steep when goods are inelastic. So let us just discuss this in context of natural monopoly. So here let us draw two example here, like say price and quantity. Say here panel 1 and here panel 2, and in both the panels along with the vertical axis we are measuring price, and along with the horizontal axis like x-axis we are measuring quantity. And say in both the cases we are having marginal cost fixed, like say MC here in panel 2 and here also MC2. So now imagine the panel 1, it talks about inelastic. If price is inelastic. In panel 2, let's talk about when price is elastic, like goods are elastic goods. So if inelastic, then it will be stiffer, and when it is elastic, then demand function will be flatter. So here we can say it's like demand function, where it's like average revenue, and here also like demand, which is average revenue, and you can see what is the changes in the quantity and price. So now let us assume here, like say in panel 1 and panel 2, where we are assuming OP in both the panel, just remember, in both the panels we have OP1 amount equals to OP1. So that is very important to remember. So now in case of inelastic and in case of elastic, so let us assume that we are changing 1 unit, we are changing 1%, change 1% change in price. Suppose price is increasing like P1 to P2 in the same level, then what is the changes in the quantity? So in case of inelastic, at this point, at the initial point is like Q1 at point say A, and now we have new equilibrium point B, here Q1 at point A, and here say new equilibrium point B, and here quantity 2, and here quantity 2. So here the changes in the quantity, and here changes in the quantity. So in multi-product, it actually for multi-product natural monopolies, it depends on the price elasticity. If it is inelastic good, then changes 1 unit changes of the price, it will lead to very little changes in the quantity. So quantity will be reduced, but changes in the quantity will be very less as compared to goods which are elastic. So here you can certainly see that Q1, Q2 under panel 1 is much less than Q1 and Q2 under panel 2. So this is what the cases where multi-product natural monopolies happens, and this is basically the typical case of the pricing strategies that also depends in the market. Like say certain goods, even private goods, certain goods are inelastic, very essential. Certain goods are very, it's not essential, like little less essential. For instance, cable TV is little less essential than say gas household that requires, or say electricity. Or for instance, postal services, it is little less essential as compared to say electricity utility. So that way, even within the commodity private goods, some goods are inelastic and some goods are elastic, and that is how natural monopolies will behave. So just to lead to the next discussion is like when government failure happens, like say the first point is limited information about the product, and then limited control over private market responses. The third point is limited control over bureaucracy, and then limitations imposed by the political processes. So if this happens in the market, and then government definitely can't actually implement certain policies which government is supposed to, and these are the hindrance for the government to operate or to provide socially optimum level of efficiency point. So this is where government fails in terms of providing socially optimum level of efficient point in the economy and society as a whole. So I stop here this lecture, and for better understanding or for more in details about this lecture, you can see these two references. And thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in my next class.